Howdy folks, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I will let you in on some of my top secret stationary surveillance techniques I have used in the past with a good deal of success. First, I wanted to let you know about a new feature YouTube has released for all creators. This has been out a while for some of us, but now it is a feature for all creators in the United States, I believe. If you are familiar with live streaming on YouTube, you have probably seen your favorite creators have this thing called Super Chat come up. Super Chats for live streaming videos is a way for viewers to say thanks to the streamer, as well a way to get their question or comment pushed up to the top and more visible to the person doing the live stream. Now YouTube has the same thing for us creators who do not do live streams. So if you want to send a shout out, a quick question that will get noticed by your favorite creators, or just send a thank you, now you can click the thanks button below any video and send that creator a little tip, if you will. I have had this option available for many months now on my videos, and I am very grateful for those that have sent me a super thanks in the past. Now, I am not just saying this to try to get you to send me a super thanks. Of course, if you want, that would be great. I look at the super thanks I get as someone buying me a cup of coffee, and I do prioritize questions that come with a super thanks. I just wanted to make you aware of it, so if you are binge watching your favorite creators out there, if you want to support them, now you can do that with a super thanks, a super chat if they live stream, or becoming a member of the channel. Now let's get on with the topic of the video. Secret stationary surveillance tips I have successfully used in the past. Stationary surveillance is where you just sit in one location and wait for your subject to go active. Then you document what the subject is doing. That documentation may be with video or simple observations you make. Then you document your observations in a report. Most stationary surveillance we as private investigators conduct is usually going to be involved with regular surveillance jobs. So we go out in the wee hours of the morning, set up a stationary surveillance position inside our surveillance vehicle, hunker down, wait for the subject to go active, then we go on mobile surveillance once the subject leaves. But there are many other types of stationary surveillance I have conducted in the past, and I will get to those in just a moment. Now, in these typical types of stationary surveillance situations, what I usually do is show up early, find a good position where I can watch the residents and where I can obtain a good follow when the subject leaves. Then I black out inside my vehicle using foam core cutouts for my windows, a sunscreen in the windshield, and I hunker down and I just sit there and I wait and I wait and I wait. Now, if I believe I'm going to be there for a while, and if it's truly just a stationary surveillance, I will often hop in the back seat. I always have a black curtain up behind me too, regardless of where I sit in the car, and I have little holes cut out in the corners of my side window blackouts so I can see out and I can shoot video out if needed. Stationary only surveillance comes in many varieties of investigations too. I have conducted stationary only surveillance on retail businesses where an owner or manager was suspicious about employees' behaviors such as employee theft and need to know what was going on. Obviously, in these type of cases, the owner of the business can have security cameras installed, but there are ways to circumvent the security cameras as they can't cover every area of the business. And then there is the time involved in watching hours upon hours of surveillance camera video every day. With most cases like this, I have found that I can usually just set up a stationary position somewhere with my surveillance vehicle, get hunkered down, and just sit, observe, and document what I see. But I have had many where I couldn't do that because the location to be observed was remote, or there just was no logical place to sit and watch and ensure the integrity of the investigation. I had one where I needed to watch a small manufacturing operation off of a highway with absolutely no place to sit without being observed. I had to get quite creative with this case. I got up way early, like around 4 in the morning, and I headed out. I parked across the highway on the shoulder with my emergency flashers on and a sign on the dash that said, "Out of gas, please do not tow." I then got in the back seat. I put up 2 curtains and my blackouts, and I sat there for 14 hours in the blistering heat, and I got the job done. I had to do 2 days on this job, so I had to do them back to back since it wouldn't make sense to have the same car out of gas again a week later. But man, I got a lot of good intel for the client, caught some of the employees doing things they shouldn't have been doing, and he was able to resolve a lot of issues his business was having. I had another job site case where I was able to work it from a park across the street. This one was a lot more comfortable as I didn't have to sit all day in a car baking in the summer heat. On that case, I used 2 investigators, myself and another private investigator. We took shifts so we wouldn't stand out too much, with one of us working a couple of hours, then the other, then the first one came back, but in different clothing, then the second investigator returned a while later. We were able to do this for several days without any issues, and we got a ton of great information and video for the client. On that one, we videotaped every person that came and went into the business, along with the vehicles they were associated with, so we could identify them later. We were able to just sit at a picnic bench a good distance away and set a camera up on a tripod, zoomed in, and get all of our video. But not all stationary surveillance jobs are that easy, to be sure. Some are even easier. I had another case where I needed to watch a house for about 10 hours a day over the course of a couple of weeks. This one was a domestic child custody case, and to top it off, the neighborhood was very tight and what we would refer to as a hot neighborhood. A hot neighborhood means it is easy to get burned in. There are a lot of suspicious people, nosy people, and folks are just plain watching for strangers all the time. And to top that off, many of the neighbors were close friends and relatives of the people residing at the subject residence we were watching. With this one, I had to get a little more creative, so I set up a remote stationary surveillance vehicle. I used this little guy here, the JVC Vario GZ-EX210 camera. This little guy here has something most cameras do not have. It has Wi-Fi capability built into it, but not just your normal Wi-Fi where you can connect your phone to the camera through an app, which this camera can do, and that is pretty cool in and of itself. With this one, I can connect this camera to a hotspot, then connect remotely to the camera from anywhere where I have an internet connection. Once connected, I could watch the screen real time, start and stop recording, and I could even zoom in and zoom out and take still photos too. Now, I had to take some precautions with this setup to make sure it wouldn't be detected and to make sure it wouldn't overheat. I would go out early in the morning before anyone got up and park down the street. Then I would black out my vehicle just like any other case, but I set my camera up in the rear of the vehicle on a tripod and plugged it into a DC to AC converter so the camera was on all of the time. I then hooked up a couple of DC fans connected to another power backup unit, one blowing on the camera, the other blowing on the hotspot. Then I made my connections and I got out of the car and out of the neighborhood where I could observe the camera remotely. Now the tricky part was finding a place to go where I could stay somewhere close just in case anything happened and I needed to do a walk-by to confirm certain activity. And I needed to be close by the end of the day to retrieve my vehicle and take everything back to the office, pull the video, and get ready for the next day. To complicate it even more, this was a rural town and there was no 3G, 4G, or 5G out there, and Wi-Fi connections were much more limited, to say the least. So I traveled from one fast food place or a coffee shop to another throughout the day, all within a few blocks of the target residence, where I could sit at each one for a couple of hours and watch the video. This one was very stressful indeed because I was the stranger in town, hanging out at random places, and I had to frequently walk past the residence to confirm things, but it all worked out well and the client was as happy as can be with the results. Now, on cases like that, the client does pay a premium price. I would usually prefer to have a stationary-only surveillance investigator sitting in a car all day and another outside to do walk-bys or drive-bys if needed. But this case had very special circumstances, to say the least, but not as special as the next case. Really quick, I get all kinds of questions related to the surveillance equipment I use, so I have made a special web page that lists all of my surveillance gear on the official PI Guy website, www.freeprivateinvestigatortraining.com. I will leave a link below to that page, so if you want to see exactly what I use, then check out that link down in the description. Now let me tell you about one of my most secret stationary surveillance guises I like to use. This one does not work in all cases, but man, when it can work, it is an amazing cover to be sure. The first time I used this was on a surveillance in which we had very little information about our subject. We had a photo of the subject, but even that piece of intel, the photo itself, was about 10 years old or older. We had a few potential addresses for the guy. 2 of these addresses were relatives' homes and were in your typical residential neighborhood. Through normal surveillance investigations, we were able to pretty much eliminate these 2 houses as being the regular place where our subject was laying his head. We had done about 5 days of surveillance on each house and had never observed him present at either of those addresses. So we turned our focus then to the 3rd address. This one was an apartment in an older, large brownstone apartment building. The apartment we believed he may be living in was on the 3rd floor of a 6-story building. Each floor had about 20 units on it, and there was one set of stairs in the middle of the building, as well as a set of stairs at the end of each of the 4 ends of the building. Now remember, we had just about no intel on our subject. We had age, date of birth, physical description, and a dated photograph provided to us by the client. We did not have any vehicles for our subject, and the apartment we thought he might be living in was being rented by an old girlfriend of his. Through some interviews and other investigative means, we gathered information that made us believe he may be living with her again. But we had almost no intel on her either. No vehicles, an old photo, date of birth, basically the same limited information as what we had for our subject. When I first started, I was going to try covering each entrance one at a time to see if I ever observed the subject or his girlfriend. But this would have required a lot of time, as we might have to spend several days watching each exit point, and even then we would never have a clear view of the door, so there was always the possibility they could leave undetected. So I conducted a recon of the apartment building and the apartment complex to see what I could see. While on this recon, I did go up on the 3rd floor where the subject apartment was located, and I stood outside the apartment and I listened for a while, and I did hear 2 adult voices, male and female, and at least 1 child inside. During that recon, I had also walked around and I checked out other buildings, and one thing really stood out to me. That one thing was there were numerous homeless people sitting around and sometimes inside the apartment buildings. Then the light went off in my head and I took a closer look at the building where the subject apartment was located. I noticed at the bottom of each of the stairs was a little nook, sort of a small offset. Under the stairs, maybe 2 foot by 2 foot wide and about 3 foot high. And these nooks, folks, were, well, to say the least, kind of gross. But I devised a plan on how I could use one of these nooks for my investigation. I had noted that the subject apartment was closest to the front main exit of the building. Given this, I surmised that the subject would most likely come down those stairs regardless of what exit door he would use to leave the building. So I got myself an old tarp. I stopped and I got myself some old used clothes, a small backpack, and a blanket at a thrift store. Then I went to the liquor store. Now at the liquor store, I got myself a couple of bottles of, you guessed it, soda. Yep, I got 2 large bottles of soda, and I asked the guy if I could have them bagged in those little brown bags the liquor stores used for liquid adult refreshments. Then I went out early in the morning with all of my gear I needed in that old backpack, and I got set up in a stationary undercover surveillance position inside the apartment building. Now I also didn't shave for a few days, nor did I bathe that day, and I had an old ball cap on too. I then set up a makeshift little bed with my tarp in that nook under the stairs with my backpack like a pillow, and I just kept my head low, and I sat there, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. I did have a few people comment about me as they walked by, but nothing threatening or suspicious, so that told me the guise was probably working well. But would it last? How long could I sit there? Would the building superintendent come and tell me to leave? I had a million questions going through my mind. My heart was racing a million beats a minute, and man, was I ever nervous just sitting there. After about 4.5 hours of sitting there, I heard someone coming down the stairs. It sounded like a woman and a child. As she rounded the bottom of the stairs, she looked and noticed me, then took her child's hand and walked quickly down the hall and exited the building at the far door. And when she looked at me, I looked up and I smiled a little. I grabbed one of my soda bottles in the brown bag and I realized this was probably the subject's ex, or most likely now current girlfriend. She matched the photo to a T, so I knew at least we had intel proving she did still reside there. Then her and her daughter came walking back in, past me again, then up the stairs. This startled me a little as I was not expecting that, but wait until you hear what happened next. A few minutes later, I heard multiple sets of steps coming down the stairs and voices. Yep, I heard voices. And those voices sounded very much like the voices I had heard when I stood outside the subject apartment a few days before. Then suddenly I see the same female subject and her child holding onto her hand tightly as they walked by me with a male subject who looked remarkably like the subject of my investigation. They walked past me, paid me no mind, then went down to that far end of the building, and they walked out the door. I then got up as quick as I could, and I walked out the front door, and I started walking down the sidewalk with my backpack on my back, my brown bottle bag in one hand, and a covert camera in the other. Then lo and behold, I see an old brown four-door sedan rounding the corner, exiting the back parking lot, and coming right towards me. I could easily see the male who I thought was my subject, his girlfriend, and her daughter inside that vehicle, and I could easily see the front license plate of the vehicle. I kept walking so as to not draw any suspicion, and after they turned onto the main road, I walked down the street a few blocks where my vehicle was parked. I got into my vehicle and I repositioned it where I could watch the main entrance and the back parking lot, and then I ran the license plate. The plate came back to the parents of the subject and was registered at one of those addresses we had surveilled before. This was golden. We now had a vehicle and confirmation the subject was residing at this location. I sat there for a few more hours. They did return. I did get more video and intel on the subject and was able to inform the client of all that had occurred. The client was ecstatic, to say the least, and ordered 5 more days of surveillance on the subject. During that 5 days, we got a ton of intel and video on our subject, so much in fact the client was able to get the case settled without having to go to court. Now, if you think that was amazing, then you will want to check out this video of me live out conducting some locates, skips, and process serves.